Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I hope you've had a very enjoyable evening, probably going through the Christmas presents that we received yesterday from the European Commission and trying to determine whether or not it is the gleaming toy that you hoped that it would be, or perhaps whether it's one of those knitted woolly jumpers that you didn't really want and have to work out what to do with it. Well, I'm delighted to say that as you've seen in the video, we had a tremendous amount of questions that were being posed there. We do have a very good panel today that can help us indeed unpackage what has been delivered in this present and answer some of those questions. I'll be moving shortly to our keynote speaker, Katerina Sikov-Magni, Director from DG Energy, who will give the keynote speech and will outline some of the key ideas that the Commission have had when they were drawing up this package and what they're hoping to achieve. And indeed, then we'll move on to Kavita Ahluwalia, who is from Uniper and also the chair of the Strategy Committee in Eurogas. We have Dagmar Druzwa, who is from the Environment Defence Fund. And we also have Catherine Banet, who is Associate Professor in Energy Law from the University of Oslo. So a good mixture of talents and interests to talk to us this morning about the gas package. And so I'm hoping that we will be able to indeed take some of those layers off and work out exactly how this will indeed deliver the gas decarbonisation that we want for the future. As you know, in Eurogas, we're fully committed to achieving carbon neutrality and climate neutrality in our sector even before 2050 with the right policy framework. And we also have a strong belief that one element that would help to get us to the 2030 targets of decarbonisation of 55% would be specific targets for gas decarbonisation and, of course, indeed, the volumes of renewable gas we could consume in 2030. So I think without further ado, I'm going to ask Katerina Sikov-Magni to take the floor and to give the Commission's views on how they see this package and how it will help achieve the Fit for 55 target, which is all part of the Green Deal, of course, which is one of the most ambitious legislative agendas that has ever been launched anywhere in the world, by my reckoning. And I'm delighted to have you with us this morning, Katerina, because we really are, as I say, we've started the unwrapping process and we're very interested to see how you see what's inside and how it will help us achieve our objectives. Good morning, Katerina. The floor is yours, and thanks again for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us.
Many thanks, James, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Very pleased to be here today with you just a few hours after the Commission adopted this major package and after the press conference that was given yesterday by the Executive Vice President Timmermans and Commissioner Simpson on the package. And I'm sure you all listen to it carefully, so I can be brief today. So this package of proposals that was adopted now is part of the Green Deal package that has been put on the table over the last year, I would even say. And it is to make sure that we, as Europe, deliver on the ambitious climate and energy targets that we have set to ourselves in order to decarbonize the economy. So this latest package includes proposals to decarbonize the gas market and on renewable hydrogen, as well as on methane emission reductions. But before I go into the package in a little bit of more detail, let me first put the package into context. So, as I mentioned, this is part of the Green Deal bigger package, if we call it like that. So last July, we published the even a bigger package of proposals, also then aiming to implement the European Green Deal. That package was called Fit455 Package. So it aimed at putting in place all the tools, regulations, and measures to ensure that Europe will reduce carbon emissions by 2030 by 55%, so as to be on track for 2050 carbon neutrality. This package includes many elements which are very relevant also for the package we are discussing today. It focuses on the energy efficiency, which needs to be the first principle to apply. It looks into how to bring more renewables into the energy sector. It introduces a strategy on forests And perhaps most importantly, it also proposed a review of the emission trading system and the effort sharing regulation. And these are, of course, as a package, the key elements that will influence and already do influence the energy mix in member states and the uptake of new decarbonized ways of using and producing energy. So our package, the package that we are discussing today, is to be seen in the context of this bigger, broader set of regulations and instruments and mechanisms to deliver decarbonization. But coming now then to the package that was adopted now and we are discussing here in this event. With this package, we aim to make the EU less dependent on fossil fuel imports and to also make our energy system more resilient for the future. We only have to look at the current surge in energy prices to illustrate how important it is for our energy system to withstand shocks and for citizens to be buffered from further volatility in prices. We have also seen how the sectors interact and price surge stemming from the economic recovery in the world, in Asia in particular, that impacted the gas price, has now also then had strong impacts on the electricity price. But let's then turn into the key aspects of the hydrogen and gases market decarbonization package. So the EU, as I mentioned, has committed to become climate neutral by 2050. And this means that our gas system needs to be decarbonized in less than 3 decades. Until then, the share of renewable and low carbon gases will need to significantly increase and gradually replace fossil gas. The proposals on hydrogen and decarbonization of gas markets covers the market design for gases, including hydrogen and access to pipelines. It does not promise alone to deliver the decarbonization of gases. And that's why I put such an emphasis on the Fit455 package and the bigger Green Deal package, because all these are pieces of the same puzzle, which then aim to deliver decarbonization across the economy and in the gases sector as well. So the package it aims and it does create the right conditions to be able to shift from fossil gas to renewable and low carbon gases in a cost-effective way and as rapidly as feasible. The proposals have 5 main policy goals. First, to create a cost-effective cross-border hydrogen infrastructure and a competitive hydrogen market so that hydrogen can play a more prominent role in the energy sector than it does today. The proposal creates a level playing field based on EU-wide rules for hydrogen and removes barriers that hamper its development. It also creates the right conditions for infrastructure for the supply of natural gas to be reused for hydrogen. This contributes to both cost savings and decarbonization. The proposal introduces the creation of a European network of operators for hydrogen to ensure sound management of the future EU hydrogen network and to facilitate trade and supply of hydrogen across borders. And this is also to ensure that the let's say the interests and the needs of the future hydrogen economy, future hydrogen network are fully taken into account without vested interests, but also to underline the energy sector integration needs between electricity, gas, and the future hydrogen network operators. Second, the package aims at helping to integrate more renewable and low carbon gases into the grid, which also helps cross-border trade and access into the market for these gases. We know that the renewable and low carbon gases are to be produced much more locally in a much more decentralized way than the today's fossil gas system, which is, as we know, very much based on imports, big pipelines and imports from outside the EU, given that our domestic resources are depleting. So the new gas market landscape will be different already from the geographical perspective, but it will also be much more equal, if I call it like that, because we expect renewable and low carbon gases to be produced across the EU. So we need to ensure that these gases find easy access to the market and can outcompete where the fossil gas in the system. Third, we also put in place a framework for more integrated network planning. And here the energy system integration I mentioned comes into play. This planning then brings together electricity, gases, and hydrogen networks to make the development of energy infrastructure more cost effective, so as to actually minimize the need for building new infrastructure, so as to have a positive impact on consumer prices. Fourth, the package aims at ensuring transition to cleaner energy in a fair and just manner. We propose to include most consumer rights aspects of the electricity directive into also the gases sector, and this includes, among others, rights that cover price regulation, that support vulnerable consumers, and that make it easy for us as consumers to switch energy providers in gas as well. And fifth and last, the package also aims at improving the resilience of the EU energy system and security of energy system, addressing the situation we see today in the market. So decarbonisation energy will only work if the EU is in a strong position to counter future shocks and ensuring that we have energy security at all times. So today's proposals reinforce the current regulatory of security of supply by extending and adapting the existing rules. The amendment strengthened, on the one hand, solidarity between member states, so that in case of a gas shortage, no household is left in the cold and neighboring countries can come to their aid. The current energy crisis has illustrated also the importance of improving storage facilities. We have seen that our storage is today only at something like 60 to 65% of full capacity, which is less than 12% in comparison to previous years. So if the winter is going to be very cold, we have to be very cautious in consumption if this situation does not change. Our proposals then also address the problem of making storage an integral part of the risk assessment and preventive measures that member states are already required to do. If member states want to work together to also ensure that they have stocks available in case of emergency, member states are also, or TSOs are also enabled to work together on a voluntary basis on such strategic stocks. So together with the July package of the Green Deal, we can go a long way to achieving our ambitious climate and energy targets, so that we can leave behind a planet that future generations are not ashamed of, but can take pride in and can have a meaningful life as we see it. So I wish you a very fruitful discussion today, and look forward to engaging with you in future events and many discussions that are to come. Many thanks. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Katarina. Thank you for the very comprehensive overview, of course, putting the package in its context and explaining the 5 key elements as you've described them, but also then linking at the end there to the current situation that we see in the energy markets and some of the solutions that we thought about in terms of storage. As I said, we're very grateful for your overview this morning. It will certainly spark debate, I'm sure, amongst the panelists. And yeah, I feel that it's in a very ambitious package that you put out. But as you say, there will surely be discussions and meetings for us all in the future as we all come to terms with what exactly in it. Katerina, have a really good rest of the day. Thanks again for taking the time to join us. You're always very welcome at our events, and wish you, of course, to have a very enjoyable festive season. Thank you. After that very interesting opening from a very comprehensive overview she's given, how are you seeing these 5 specific principles or key themes that she's outlined? What does it mean for Uniper, and how are you thinking about this package? Is this going in the right direction? Are we going to be able to move forward with gas decarbonisation, or are there elements that are missing?
Thanks, James. Good morning, everyone. Yes, I mean, I think that was a great overview provided by Katerina, as always. And I'll try and follow suit. I have to admit, I'd say it's the same for us as with everyone this morning. Quite a lot of work already, looking at potential changes that have been put forward as well, compared with previous leaks that we had seen. And obviously the devil is in the detail on a lot of these aspects for us all. So try and give a fairly broad overview of what we think so far. And then looking forward to the discussion later, of course, with Dagmar and with Catherine. Maybe just quickly a few words on Uniper before I start, so that everyone knows where we're coming from. So we're headquartered in Düsseldorf, and we're an international energy company with 12,000 employees in more than 40 countries. Our portfolio comprises power generation, global energy trading, energy storage and service provisions. We hold about 35 gigawatts of generation capacity and gas turnover of more than 220 BCM annually. Our strategy and what we've basically decided in terms of our own targets is that we want to be climate neutral, reach climate neutrality for our European generation business by 2035, and climate neutrality for the Uniper Group as a whole by 2050. And together with our main shareholder, Fortum, we are the 3rd largest producer of CO2-free energy in Europe. Hydrogen is at the very heart of our business and strategy going forward. And so this package is indeed absolutely critical. Maybe 1 or 2 words as well from a Eurogas perspective. I think this package very much reflects Eurogas's thinking, which all the members should be very pleased about. Indeed, Eurogas has committed itself to become climate neutral before 2050. And of course, we completely fully endorse the GHG emissions targets set by the European Commission, i.e. minus 55% by 2030. What we've seen now with this package is that, at least in terms of the modeling and the thinking, in terms of what kind of gases would be foreseen as well by 2050 in the mix, it is very much in line with a study put forward by Eurogas in 2020. So coming to the details, I think I want to focus on a couple of elements. So firstly, this package has been a long time coming, and it's very, very positive that this has now been put forward. It is definitely the mirroring that we've wanted to see as well, reflected, reflecting the electricity clean energy for all Europeans package put forward a couple of years ago on the retail side as well. There's a nod to obviously vulnerable consumers and provisions in line with those elements. In terms of wholesale markets, it absolutely puts forward the structure that we need for the evolution of the gas sector. And I'm very, very pleased to say that with this package, it is clear that the gas sector is at the heart of the decarbonisation efforts of Fit for 55. It is an integral part of Fit for 55, and that has been made clear. And as such, all the elements, most of the elements, I would say, are now in place for ensuring that more and more renewable and low carbon gases can be fed into the mix. So we view this package overall as positive. And we're particularly pleased to see from a UNEP point of view that existing provisions have been broadened to ensure the inclusion and support of more low carbon gases, including hydrogen, certification of low carbon gases, and are key in that regard. What we also very much favour is that there is a clear emphasis on principles set for non-discriminatory treatment of market players, such as access conditions to network systems, both natural gas and hydrogen, and that the Commission does foresee a continued upholding of unbundling principles and transparency for the wholesale market in general. Obviously, this issue is one that has now been highlighted by stakeholders this morning as well, across the board from a network operator's perspective, and probably rightly so. There are some exemptions on the horizontal unbundling side, which at least in terms of a time provision and time limit, these derogations might indeed be seen as necessary also from a Eurogas point of view. This is to be determined going forward, but it is safe to say that this is one of the issues and aspects of this package that is certainly gaining a lot of interest. Other than that, what is also important is that on the definition side of low carbon gases, we've seen what we're missing at the moment, I think, is the delegated act that is envisaged by 2024, which the Commission will put forward, which should then determine the details around this GHG emissions that would define low carbon gas. This minus 70% of GHG emissions that is foreseen. And this lack of clarity at this point in time, and the fact that is to be determined by a delegated act by 2024, basically after one would expect this package to have been signed off, that is somewhat worrying. Here, more clarity would certainly be preferred, and this is something that we would definitely wish to highlight towards the institutions that will be dealing with these files, because it is certainly really, really important. Moving forward, moving beyond the gas directive and gas regulation and to methane, I can say, at least from a UNEP point of view and also from a Eurogas point of view, I think the sector as a whole very much welcomes and supports the intended regulation on methane emissions. And it is very much in line with the international activities that have been ongoing. It is modeled, obviously, on the OGMP 2.0 framework, and we believe this is absolutely the right approach. Obviously, again, the devil is in the detail around reporting structures, etc. It is not going to be easy, and we say that as a midstream player, but we are fully aware of our responsibilities also in this area. And I think I can definitely say this on behalf of Eurogas as well. Here, this is something that obviously the industry takes very, very seriously, and we look forward to engaging more on with stakeholders, and notably, obviously, civil society as well, going forward to get all of this right. Last but not least, I think one other aspect that has came to our attention, or has come to our attention and been flagged fairly late on, is of course this introduction of a ban for long-term contracts for unabated fossil gas by the end of 2049, and it's been included in the directive. And here, I think it's important to say that it is, in terms of end date, it's very understandable that the Commission would wish to include this, to give a very clear deadline of by when they foresee these contracts basically expiring. It is in line with the targets set. For us, at least from a UNEP point of view, we we will need to look at this further. But having said that, though, our understanding is that this is very much understandable. This is very much in line with everything put forward by the Commission, and as such makes a lot of sense. Is it the right signal to send towards third countries and those we wish to basically establish further links with, also in terms of hydrogen imports and imports of other low carbon gases going forward? Does it establish the level of trust as a basis, etc.? That is one perhaps question worth asking. But overall here, it is clear that obviously when it comes to natural gas, an end date of 2049 is, for long-term contracts at least, is absolutely understandable. And I think I would leave it at that for now, and pass on to Catherine and Dragma. Thank you, James.
Thanks very much, Kavita. Just before you go, actually, I think it's really good. A really interesting overview as well on the points of view, and I think we can certainly agree with you, Eurogas point of view, speaking about on methane emissions. You're touching on long-term contracts at the end, and this is one of the perhaps controversial elements of it, because they're saying, that there won't be long-term contracts beyond 2049. Now, Uniper's based in Germany, and in Germany you have a new coalition agreement which says that natural gas is indispensable for the energy transition. Do you think that this 2049 sort of phase-out date, if you like, for long-term contracts is in the spirit of this statement of indispensable fuel for the energy transition? Do you think there's a sort of link here going on between the German coalition agreement and what we've seen in the wording there?
So the coalition agreement put forward by the new Ampel coalition is very favorable towards natural gas in the transition. It has, through various different provisions, ensured that going forward through a new electricity market design, etc., the envisaged need for further use of gas-fired power plants, etc., will be secured. There's a real understanding that security of supply also needs to be considered in light also of the decarbonisation targets, because, of course, in Germany, that is also very much a discussion about an earlier coal phase out. So is this all in unison? I believe it is, very much so. The role for natural gas is, at least from a German perspective, very clear. The role of hydrogen is very clear. The efforts and ambitions set in that coalition agreement have been doubled by 2030 in the German context, from 5 gigawatts to 10 envisaged use, and here that will obviously require various different elements, funding, etc. All of these points have been somewhat alluded to, obviously to be fleshed out going forward. That strategy needs to be developed, and a lot of legislation will now follow. There's a plethora of legislation expected in early 2022. But I think, again, it all points to this evolution of the gas sector and the really important role that the gas sector plays in the overall decarbonisation of the economy. So I think all of this is very much in line.
Yeah, I tend to agree, sort of looking at the stars and seeing that they're in alignment. There seems to be something going on, I would say. Thanks for that, Kavita. We'll come back to you. Just to remind the audience, we've had 3 questions so far. Please do post questions. There will be a great opportunity. There'll be at least 10 or 15 minutes at the end of this for the panelists to answer your questions. I'd like to invite Dagmar to join us now. Dagmar, of course, representative of the Environment Defence Fund here in Europe. Of course, very much focused, in our experience, Eurogas working on methane emissions. Dagmar, sort of landmark methane regulation, addressing methane emissions from energy sources. How are you seeing it from your point of view? Is it ambitious enough? Is it going in the right direction? The floor is all yours, and we're all ears, I can assure you.
Thank you, James, and thanks for inviting me. And yeah, and it's really good that I have a chance here to talk about the methane regulations. It's a priority area for us. It has been for more than 10 years. And I think just as a context, 2021 has been a good year for methane. I think even a year ago, lots of people, including governments, didn't really understand what methane was about and why it's important to reduce it. And I think now the message is loud and clear. that we all now know that reducing methane is the fastest way to slow global warming, and probably our only chance to still bend the curve and stay within the Paris goals. So we were very pleased earlier this year that at COP26, the EU and the US launched the Global Methane Pledge, and also actually utterly impressed that more than 100 countries already subscribed. So the hard work now starts, because words have got to be turned into action. And I think that is where we can congratulate the Commission, because this is probably the first expression of a package of rules that aims to address methane reductions. You know, to be clear, we would also like to see rules for methane from agriculture and waste, but we fully get it that we start with energy. You will probably all know that the IEA keeps on saying that this is the low-hanging fruit. It can be done at low and perhaps even no cost in some cases. So that's all good. Now, on the proposal, it focuses very heavily on measurement, reporting and verification, MRV, leak detection and repair, and it also ends routine venting and flaring. I think in general, the draft rules look pretty good, and what Kavita already mentioned, they largely track existing and well-tested legal frameworks, such in Colorado and in New Mexico. So that's helpful. We know that nothing of this is really new. And yeah, I guess that gives some reassurance that it's been done by others already. But I'd like to focus on two aspects where we do feel the rules could really be improved. And the first is in respect to MRV, and that's something we deeply, deeply care about, because let's face it, a problem with methane has been proper measurement, reporting and verification. And that really has got to be improved so that we can reduce emissions effectively, and we know what we are reducing. So what is good about the rules, and really important therefore, is that it refers to direct measurement of source and site level methane emissions. That is at the heart of improving data. But as a minimum, we want to see that the rules replicate those of the OGMP 2.0, the voluntary oil and gas methane partnership. Many in the audience will know that that initiative has focused on establishing best practices, both emission quantification and management. So that would mean that if the EU standard would go below that, that would not just be a failure, but it would in effect undermine and perhaps even stop more ambitious actions by companies. Now, we've pored over the text of that paragraph, and really, we can't really figure out whether it does track OGMP exactly or whether it is a lower standard. And so this is a very clear message from us. We've got to have clarity on that, and as a minimum, it has got to have that standard. If it could go beyond it, that would even be better, but the minimum is clear. It has got to track OGMP 2.0. And then on imported emissions, you won't be surprised to hear me say that we are incredibly underwhelmed by that chapter. So for those of you who haven't had a chance to look at the chapter on methane emissions from outside the EU, it introduces a so-called transparency tool that puts an obligation on importers to collect and publish data about the exporters. And frankly, we do not understand how that will lead to emission reductions. And I guess this is actually a question for the audience. So if in the audience there are any people that are involved in buying gas from outside the EU, will a transparency database mean that you will stop buying gas from those who don't adhere to EU rules? It's a very firm question, isn't it? And the other question is, if you're in the audience and you're a gas operator outside the EU, will you care about the database? Will that encourage you to replicate all the EU rules and make sure that your gas is clean? We're not convinced. So what we want to see are meaningful provisions that make sure that the measures that apply to operators in the EU also apply to upstream emissions. And that is very much from a climate environmental perspective. But I could also imagine that if you're an operator in the EU, you would want to see a level playing field. So this is really important. You know, we're here in a Eurogas event. We all know that 85% of gas is imported. We also all know that most of the methane is released before the gas enters the EU. So if you take into account those upstream emissions from gas, which are not taken into account in the rules, then the impact on gas reduction level by 2030 is actually only 1/10 of the entire supply chain. And I guess everyone in the audience will agree that that is disappointing. And we really don't get it. We all know that the EU is a master in setting rules on imported goods. So in a previous life, I used to work on agriculture legislation. Every single agriculture product that gets into the EU needs to meet EU standards before it can be placed on the market. We require that cars can only enter the market if it meets emission standards. We do the same for electrical goods. And I think even 2 weeks ago, DG Envy published a proposal which is about setting conditions on the entering of the market for so-called tropical goods. So why don't we do that for fossil fuels? You know, there's nothing new there. It's well tested. It can be done. And so we very much support the opinion of the European Parliament that it published in November. So measures in the EU must also become a condition for fossil fuels entering the EU. And also a binding target has to be set. To be fair, we do welcome the review clause, because in theory, that would make it possible to put more stringent measures on imports by the end of 2025. But the language of that text could be improved. It's not really clear what the conditions are for putting forward such measures. Plus, it's a co-legislative procedure. So, you know, that would add another 2 or 3 years on that entering into force. So you can see mixed views. There's good elements, but 2 quite crucial elements that have got to be improved really quite seriously. And I do want to say something about the gas market package as well, if you allow me. So from our perspective, it is essential that the package sets an effective framework with the right incentives to reduce fossil gas consumption significantly, and also that it makes sure that scarce resources such as renewable hydrogen are used only when no other solutions exist. And we are not sure, therefore, that the framework actually is there. It needs serious improvement as well. And I echo others who have referred to the lack of independent oversight, but also that the package doesn't ensure a deep decline of fossil-based gases. I'd like to pick up on one very specific point, though. You know, as an NGO, we really focus on the science. It's incredibly important for us. And so, therefore, I want to say something about the use and blending of hydrogen. We agree with those that are worried about how the draft regs deal with that, but I have got an additional argument that I want to put in the mix. So we do think that green hydrogen can play a role in the energy transition, and that is when other solutions are either not available or they're more costly. But at this moment in time, we just do not have a clear understanding of how hydrogen impacts the climate or on other environmental issues such as air quality and health. And as a reminder, I mean, I expect many of you will know that, but hydrogen, regardless of how it's produced, whether it's green, blue, or gray, it doesn't really matter. It's a powerful, short-lived, indirect greenhouse gas. So what does that mean? When it leaks into the atmosphere, it indirectly warms the climate by increasing concentrations of other greenhouse gases, such as methane, ozone, and also water vapor. And that then results in additional warming. So just stand still with that, you know, just try to internalize that. Hydrogen itself can cause global warming because of the effects it has in the atmosphere. And also, the small size of hydrogen molecule makes it very hard to contain. And it means it has a very high potential to leak, especially when it's transported. So the reality is that we still know very little about the extent of hydrogen leakage, but we do know that indirect warming impacts on the Earth. So the bottom line is that before we start to use hydrogen, we've got to have a better picture. So we need more data to understand where it makes most sense to deploy hydrogen. We need to measure hydrogen's potential to leak throughout the entire value chain. And we also need to account for all relevant climate pollutant emissions using accounting methods that convey warming impacts over near and medium term. So these are some very, very strong messages. And the good news is we've got time to sort this out. These are just proposals, they've got to be negotiated. But in the meantime, we've got to get that right, because the last thing we would like to see is unintended consequences. I mean, James, we've been there before, you know that, about Dieselgate, which was sort of promoted as the best thing since sliced bread. And then we found out that there were unintended consequences that were more even harmful than the things that had allegedly improved. So, before we go to using hydrogen, we've got to sort this out first. And that's a very strong message.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that, Dagmar. Yeah. I'm sorry, I had to come in because time is moving on, and I just encouraging you to wrap up. There's a lot of things that you've said that I would like to come back and question on, but I also clearly, I'm going to warn the audience now, we're definitely going to overrun by 5 or 10 minutes. So I hope you can stay with us. There are a lot of you here, and we've got 15 questions now. So my pleas have been answered. I think only one point about the hydrogen is that, Dagmar, as far as I'm understanding things, if you look at the European Commission and IPCC, they're not classifying hydrogen as a greenhouse gas.
No.
In that respect. I think you've clarified it there in the sense that you say this is indirect, and it's an indirect effect about mixing with other elements within the atmosphere. So there's not really much need for a continued further discussion of that. There are some questions that I want to come back to after Catherine, because there are questions about MRV relating to the distribution system. Have a quick look at the questions, because I'm going to pick one up on DSO and the amount of measuring that is foreseen in the regulation. So I forewarn you, because I'm going to come back to that one, Dagmar. Catherine, thank you, Dagmar, as well. Thank you. Catherine, please. Catherine, we've heard from the industry point of view, how they're seeing the overview of this package. We've heard from Dagmar, of course, and her concerns around the methane situation. You, as an academic, as an expert in energy law, how are you seeing the impacts of this new package? What could it mean for consumers? I think this is an angle that is very important and one we shouldn't overlook. And with your great expertise, we'd be very interested to see how you see the package will improve or do nothing for consumers. How do you see it, Catherine? And good morning. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, good morning, James, and good morning, everyone. And thanks again for the invitation to comment on this package. I agree with Kavita. We are still digesting the package, and here the purpose of my points will be really to put in perspective some of the provisions that are proposed, and that is a starting point for a broader reflection in the weeks to come. And in the following minutes, I would very much comment on aspects related to market design and to consumer protection as well. And I would also like to start by two points. The first one relates to a fundamental preliminary question, which is whether hydrogen is to be considered as a new market or part of an existing market and energy system that is under transformation. From what I heard and read in the proposal and from the presentations yesterday from the European Commission, I see both of them. We're reading that it seems that the European Commission considers it as a new specific market for hydrogen, but at the same time, this market relies on existing infrastructures. We're talking about decarbonization of gas markets, and at the end, all energy carriers should be able to compete with each other in an integrated energy system. So a bit of both, but this conceptual approach from the start, I think, is very important in terms of consequences for market rules. And we see both in the proposal for the directive and the regulation on gas, that we have, on the one hand, a hydrogen-based infrastructure that will progressively complete the network for natural gas, and on the other hand, a gas infrastructure in which fossil gas will progressively be replaced. So I think They're a bit of both. And this is also reflected in the way the lack of rules is presented. We do have some rules, but they may need to be clarified, or should we have a proper regime? And that's, for example, the question of the establishment of the NO. So that's a first starting point. The second one is the timing element. The European Commission say that it aims to establish a competitive hydrogen market with dedicated infrastructure. And yes, this is absolutely the goal to reach. But the market rules need to be flexible enough to let the market develop. And therefore, they have applied this two-phase approach before and after 2030. I think it's absolutely relevant, and that's something that many have argued for, to have a step-wise approach. And another question is that it is fair to assume that the market will develop differently and at different paces in Europe, in different countries. And we may have issues as to the harmonization of the regime, where certain countries want to speed up, want to make it more flexible, more competitive, while others may want to stay to their minimum threshold. So in terms of, for example, unbundling regime or cross-boundary infrastructure, that could be a part. But let me now comment on market design rules. And that in doing that, I'm referring as well to work that I have been doing in the context of academic research, where I was advising on 4 main regulatory principles for building that regulatory framework around market design or market redesign for a decarbonized gas market. And those are integrated energy system planning and governance tools. So seems to align pretty well with the proposal. The second one related to efficient and coordinated permitting procedures. The third one on operation of transport networks and related infrastructure, and finally access to the grid. So I would like to comment on those 4 points very quickly, and also start by saying, since we're talking about level playing field and system integration, that the question of definition, as Kavita mentioned, is absolutely fundamental. We have a shorter list of definition than in the hydrogen strategy. There are still some points to clarify. It's very positive that we have a harmonized application of gas quality and safety standards. That's fundamental for building an internal market for hydrogen and decarbonized gas. But we need to have further clarity when it is needed. And the fact that the carbon cycle proposal as well is referring to derivatives, I think that's also an interesting link to keep in mind. So let's go through those 4 main principles, regulatory principles, that are reflected in the proposal. So that's a way of categorizing the proposal on hydrogen and decarbonized gas. The first bench of proposals relate to coordination and integration of infrastructure planning between electricity, gas, hydrogen, and heat. I think we should not forget heat. And the proposal foresees that the national network development plans should be based on a joint scenario for these different energy carriers. And it should be also aligned with the national energy and climate plans, as well as the EU-wide 10-year development plan. I think this is very positive. That's something which must be done, and that's something that has also been started between the NTSO organizations. Gas network operators also have to include information and infrastructure that can be decommissioned and repurposed. I think this is a very good proposal, because indeed we should have an efficient use and reuse of those installations. So good point. There will be a separate hydrogen network development reporting as proposed, to ensure that the construction of the hydrogen system is based on a realistic demand projection that will complete then this planning exercise. So all in all, better coordination, even integration between the planning processes, because planning is a process, is very positive. And that should encompass as well different assets, also in the context of decommissioning and repurposing. On the government structure for that, and that's the big question of should we establish a new organization, the European Network of Network Operators for Hydrogen, ANO. That's, I think, a major point for the package. And this infrastructure, in addition, aims to develop from the hydrogen platform until a full establishment. And there will be a question as well of competences and what kind of decision this new entity could reach, what influence it will have on the shaping of the network codes, for example, for hydrogen, that will first be elaborated by NTA2G. So there are very fundamental questions related to that, and not least of competence afterwards. That's an original idea, but this model should be carefully assessed, in particular in the context of system integration, because you're creating another entity and then you will need another coordination with that entity. And the 10-year network development plan for gas already includes hydrogen projects. So that's in a way already filled here. The second point that I will make, and it is shorter, is on permitting procedures. We see that on that point in the proposal for directive, most of the points where natural gas was inserted, we just have no gases, so it applies equally. And there are some few new provisions. They are just reference to shortening the authorization process to 2 years, to have some streamlining of the procedures. However, the political agreement that has been reached yesterday morning, early morning, on the 10E regulation is probably one of the biggest tools to come, and hydrogen networks are included now, and therefore that's an important contribution to as well the permitting process for those projects covered. And I would like also to stress that we should not forget that we have a diversity of hydrogen projects, both for production and usage. And we have small projects, we have big projects, and we should accommodate for both. And it is also interesting to read the proposal on LNG terminals that could open the way to import renewable and low carbon. I think that's a very interesting path and should be kept. Very good as well that the DSOs are more involved in infrastructure planning, because they can also include those small projects. On the third point on ownership and operation of dedicated hydrogen networks, that's first a question of unbundling. And here we see that there is also a progressive regime from ownership, from vertical unbundling models that will be allowed for hydrogen networks operators until 2030, and then ownership of bundling or ISO models after that. So that progressive approach is certainly welcome. It needs to be refined. Legal separation between gas and hydrogen network operators, the transfer assets, cross-subsidization of hydrogen networks by natural gas networks, those are very crucial issues that need to be clarified quickly. The legal treatment of storage operation is also referred to, and that's something which is also key, not least for integrating renewable energy into the energy system. The final point is on access to the grid. We have as well detailed rules now that also capture hydrogen. We have a negotiated access, which is proposed until 2030, and then regulated access. That sounds relevant, and it's inspired by previous experiences around energy packages. So we built on that. We should keep the flexibility in adapting the model and the different situations, I think. So the fact that some networks will be closed network, private networks, we benefit from exemption, I think is totally relevant. There are some interesting provisions that should be carefully assessed related to the regulation of hydrogen interconnectors with third countries, notably the obligation to conclude an intergovernmental agreement for those interconnections, but as well questions of financing and cross-border cost allocation assessment that needs to be performed, like other interconnectors. So there are some prices provisions here. Tariff setting is also a very important point. Would it be domestically, but as well in terms of cross-border project and also for entry tariffs for energy terminals, discount on entry points for renewable energy and low carbon gases when setting the tariffs. Those are that have very concrete consequences for the project. And finally, on consumer protection, we see a clear alignment with electricity legislation. We see that the toolbox for protection of consumer is there with the right to switch suppliers more easily, the use of price comparison tools, get billing information that is fair and transparent, better access to data, and basic contractual rights which are ensured. In addition, I think that the fact that there is an alignment with citizen energy communities is something which is crucial, enabling that that form of energy production and consumption. But we should probably go forward in terms of consumer protection, but also enabling empowering the consumers, such as a discussion on the guarantees of origins or the retail market for hydrogen. So that's the 4 main points I see. In addition, we have still questions around financing. We have several elements in the proposal, but we are still waiting for the remaining pieces of the puzzles, and notably the stated guidelines that we are all eagerly waiting for. And there are also some links with the taxonomy. Which has been also published, and we have the market will develop, and trading of hydrogen and gas derivatives will be an interesting market to develop. There are some provisions as to transparency on those markets and the role of ACER and ANO and regulatory authorities as to the collection and publication of data. So that will be my summary of the academic views on the new package. Thank you.
No, thanks for that, Catherine. And I mean, what it does tell me, of course, is what a huge package this is. It's really so broad in its coverage. Thank you very much. I mean, really, you've gone through everything, really: planning, permitting procedures, unbundling, yes, negotiated access, all the way to the end, the consumer protection element, which I think is very important, as you rightly say, is now aligning with the electricity market, only about 4 years after the electricity market legislation was pushed through. Super amounts of detail, super elements of controversy within that. Now, theoretically, we should be finishing at 10:30. So I'm going to say we're going to keep it going for 10 minutes. And I'm really sorry to everybody. It's my moderation, which is the question here. But if we can just say for a couple more questions, there's an interesting question about blending. So maybe Kavita and Dagmar, you also come back for this open discussion, and also you can take the floor on it. Questions coming from the audience saying, do we think that the 5% blending obligation is good for society? And questioning whether it wouldn't be more preferable to have a hydrogen transport dedicated system developed from the beginning based on market demand. I think, Kavita, I'll start with you on this one. Do you see the 5% blending mandate as a positive thing, or do you think it should basically be more a question of let's just build a whole new set of infrastructure?
Thanks, James. I mean, the blending provision, as far as I understand it, is with regards to cross-border flows as a minimum requirement. And I'm absolutely no expert when it comes to this issue, but my question would be then, what does this mean for the internal market on gas and for cross-border flows then going forward if you have various different standards? So is it? We would need to check this definitely with our DSO colleagues within Eurogas, whether this is acceptable or seen as feasible from their end. Overall, from a general sectoral point of view, and also from a Uniper point of view, we absolutely see blending as necessary going forward in the heating sector. And there are clear reasons why this would be beneficial also to consumers. at least in the medium term. So this is something that, yeah, from a Eurogas point of view, we would very much welcome. And again, I think this provision needs further looking at.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Kavita. I mean, that's what I think. I think we're looking at a situation where we see that 5% is about cross-border, where there are possibilities to go beyond that in the distribution system, if that would be suitable for the particular distribution system, which will lead me on to the second question. I'm sorry, we're going quite breakneck speed through these questions now. And I mentioned it to you before, Dagmar. Basically, the local DSO, they say there are a lot of plastic local grids which are leak-free. We hardly ever find any leaks. They're saying this frequency that is required is once every 3 years. The proposal for 4 times a year is very counterproductive, and we should actually use that time on older or steel piping. Actually, how do you see that, Dagmar? How do you balance between the needs to do effective LDAR and MRV against the different types of piping that we have in Europe? Because as you know, as we all know, not all pipes are the same.
No, I think, but generally, I think the inspection frequency of quarterly is right, and that is also based on, well-tested test experience in the US, where, and people may not really know that, but this is already happening. I know, interestingly, in Colorado, for example, for some sites, there has to be monthly inspections. And I think, something perhaps to think about, because I hear what you say about gas pipes that are of a different nature, that is something to look into. But then there's the burden of proof. Is it really true that there are no leaks whatsoever? So, I don't think that simply you can therefore decide that it should be less. And at this moment in time, I think the proposal as such is correct, but there will obviously be further discussions, I guess, about detail. So yeah, be interesting to see whether it is indeed true there is no leakage whatsoever. And I can't judge that, I'm not a technical expert in that sense, but overall it's a good provision.
Thank you for that, Dagmar. I don't know if Kavita or Catherine, you also want to comment on that point. Otherwise, I'll move on to a question for Catherine, which is, actually, it's a more general one, but I think it's suitable and fair to ask you this. Because you've touched on many of the elements actually relating to unbundling, also to tariffs and cross-border, and cross-subsidization, not cross-border subsidization, not yet, cross-subsidization. Will the new rules, the question from the audience, will the new rules ensure that renewable and low-carbon gases will be cost competitive to unabated natural gas by 2030 or 2050? So you have to look into the future a bit and use a crystal ball here, Catherine, but I think it's a fair question. That's the objective of the European Commission. Do you, as an academic, as an expert, beyond academic, as an expert in energy, do you think this package is setting the direction to do that?
I see, thank you for the question. I see clearly in the package that there is a focus on infrastructure regulation. So we need to put the hardware in place to access the infrastructure, to put that first stone in place. So we're talking here about the physical market, but the financial market, the commodity market is still to develop. We have a local project, we have big production project, but it is still in the shaping. So I can't tell if that project is going to enable the development of the hydrogen market, because it's subject as well to market forces, market signals that can be provided. But the fact that you're providing the rules for the infrastructure regulation, I think that's the right move. We should first start here and enable those renewable energy and low carbon gases to enter into competition with others, and then see how it will develop based on other tools like transparency, quality of the gas, etc. And a comparison that I heard very much yesterday was with the integration of renewables into the market. I'm not sure we can draw the parallel because we're talking about energy carriers more than sources of energy. But that's for sure that hydrogen storage is key in order to integrate renewables into the energy system in a broader, wider way. So, yeah. So
I think it's a very good point that you've made about the sort of vector, if you will, against a kind of technology and cost. It's a good point, and I really appreciate that. I'm going to ask one final question, and I'm going to relieve you all. I know we've overrun by already 7 minutes. It's coming from Christopher Jones, and on, so I can say that. It's about definitions of low carbon hydrogen. And he's questioning whether the fact that it doesn't include things like zero carbon hydrogen and negative carbon hydrogen, in fact, excludes the possibilities from using pyrolysis, where pyrolysis utilizes biomethane, and therefore discourages innovation. And saying, is this problematic? I'll take it bigger. Do you think that the package is suitable to drive the innovation that we will need in the gas sector, to get all the technologies we will need to deliver the decarbonisation that is foreseen? And just to say that there's 262 million tons of oil equivalent that the European Commission likes to use, and I don't know why, but they use this measure. So 262 million tons of oil equivalent of gaseous fuels in 2050 in their modelling, which they've based their package on. Are we worried that there are some elements of this package which might stifle the innovation that we'll need to bring forward those technologies? I ask all of you for that, because I think it's relevant for methane. Dagmar, I think it's relevant for low carbon. Kavita, and I think, Catherine, it's relevant in general to say, are we going to get innovation that we need here? Kavita, Dagmar, Catherine, and we'll call it quits for the day.
So I take it I should go first.
Yes, please.
Short. I'll try and keep short. I would think that is missing. I think Christopher's hit the nail on the head there. When it comes to the definitions, like I said, there's a lot of clarity that further clarity is definitely needed. We're also missing the definition on renewable hydrogen, for example. There's like a cross-reference back to RED, etc., and then you're missing the definition there. Also, how does this square with also the communication on sustainable carbon cycles that was also put forward yesterday? I mean, basically, there's a nod there to BECCS and to a system that is to be, promoted and put in place. And I completely agree. We should be as open to any kind of new technologies, especially when it comes to, all possibilities around negative emissions going forward. I'd be very, very keen to hear any further thinking as well from Christopher Jones and the likes on this over the coming weeks and months.
I'm sure we will, Kavita. I'm sure your wish will be granted. I'll pass on to Dagmar.
I'm not sure I can add an awful lot to that. And, I don't feel at this moment in time that is really clear whether it will give those right incentives. And, so that's a very short answer. And I wouldn't want to be very firm on that. I think there's a lot missing in that whole package. So I wouldn't be surprised if this also could really be improved. Yeah.
This means that what I read from that, Dagmar, is that there's going to be a lot of sleeve rolling in the coming weeks and months on this package.
Yes, perhaps.
to fill gaps.
Yes.
Fair enough. Catherine, you get the final word from the panel today. Over to you.
I agree with the two previous speakers, and to follow up on your question about is that sufficient to enable the market? I think that the question of hydrogen definition is probably the one which is most relevant for building the commodity market, because that will be the common understanding of what is hydrogen, what type of hydrogen, and to open the door as well to the market. So I think that's the key provision, probably, looking at the definitions, the standards, and not least the link with the process of certification under the RED II, the ISO negotiations, and also the proposal on carbon cycle.
No, thanks for that. And indeed, I think I can help think about linking it also therefore to certification when you start talking about the way the definitions. This is all going to have to be seen, isn't it, in the coming months. Dear audience, I'm sorry that we've overrun by 10 minutes. It's been really very, very interesting. We've really heard from some great experts today, starting off with Katarina giving her overview, talking about the 5 principles that they've based this package on. Heard very much from Kavita how the industry is seeing things and where there could be some room for improvement, but generally saying this is going in the right direction from the industry vision. Dagmar has also come in and say, yeah, methane going well, great to see this, but there are missing elements and we'll have to make sure that they are picked up, particularly worried about the external part. And I did want to ask the question to Kavita, but I'm not going to put you on the spot, Kavita, because you are an importer. But anyway, that's a question I'm sure you can take offline to discuss. And Catherine, of course, a great blow-by-blow account of all the 4 main points that you see. And as from my point of view, also coming around to that point on consumer protection, very important elements were also raised through your intervention. So I hope everybody in the audience could say thanks very much and join me in giving sort of virtual round of applause for the input from the panelists. Thank you. I feel like we've probably touched the tip of the iceberg on this package. We only had 1 hour. I've extended it to 70 minutes. I'd like to say as well, thanks to the audience for staying with us as we have overrun. Thanks to the team for doing great work, to the panelists for the great views and really good lively discussion we've had today. And overall, I want to wish you all a very festive season, a very good festive season. Enjoy yourselves, keep well and stay safe. From all of us in Eurogas, we look forward to the next Let's Meet next year. I will remind you, of course, that all the questions that can be answered will be answered on LinkedIn through the Eurogas channel. And we will, of course, have a recording of this available on our website ASAP. So you can watch it whilst you're eating your festive roasts. Enjoy yourselves. Have a very good time. Try to get some break and rest because we've got about 4,000 pages of foods to digest from the European Commission. Keep well, stay safe. See you next year. Bye-bye.
Thank you, James.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.